Kenny Rogers was near death in a Georgia hospital in May 2019. His family believed it to be the end. Then Dolly Parton appeared with a covert scheme. She persuaded Kenny to sing one final time while smuggling in recording equipment. Everyone in the room was stunned by what transpired next. As Kenny sung what seemed like a farewell letter, his voice broke. Despite the hospital's efforts to stop them, Dolly refused to give up. You will never hear a more sorrowful tune on the radio than that recording. On August 21, 1938, Kenny Rogers was born in a tiny Houston, Texas hospital. He was the fourth of 8 children, and his full name was Kenneth Donald Rogers. His family occupied a small 2-room apartment in the San Felipe Courts government housing complex. There was never enough money. There were occasions when the only food for supper was peanut butter on bread. His father's highest salary in the 1940s was $75 a week, which was not enough to pay for food and housing. However, Kenny was not motionless. He made $9 a week cleaning floors at a hat shop. At the Rice Hotel, he carried plates. He used the $60 she saved in this way to purchase a guitar from Sears. He was yearning for more after growing up in poverty. Additionally, he was the first member of his family to complete high school by the time he was 17. He recalled that incident on national television years later. He started a band in high school with some mates, and they boldly called themselves the Scholars. They had something different, but it was funny that none of them had excellent ratings. Drive, charm, and rhythm. They performed at veterans' halls and local dances, fusing doo-wop with a dash of Elvis. They even made a song called Poor Little Doggy, which they sold 3,000 copies of in the Houston area alone. He was soon playing on Jivetown when the song was picked up by a local TV show. Kenny recorded a song titled That Crazy Feeling in a Houston recording studio in the fall of 1957. He was only 19. The record took off despite the modest expectations of the little label that printed it. In slightly over 2 months, 30,000 copies were sold in Texas. On local charts, it peaked at number 3. Due to his widespread fame, Dick Clark eventually asked him to appear on American Bandstand. America first saw Kenny Rogers on national television on February 15, 1958, when he was wearing a powder blue blazer and singing passionately. On the national chart, the song never reached number 51. It didn't matter though. He was adored by the camera, but there was a young person in love before the celebrity, before the country songs and films. 3 months after that insane feeling surfaced, on May 15, 1958, 19-year-old Kenny married Janice Gordon in a calm Houston courtroom. She was 3 months pregnant and 18. Kenny had very little. Before starting his shift at the carpet warehouse, he borrowed $75 for the license and attended the wedding in his lone suit. Carol Lynn, their daughter, was born on September 15th. Despite his determination, Kenny claimed that his whole net worth at the time consisted of a beat-up Oldsmobile and a pawned trumpet, which were worth more than the wedding. Between changing diapers and working in the factory, he managed to fit in $15 performances by mapping club gigs on pieces of paper. Although it was unpleasant and draining, it demonstrated how fiercely he was prepared to defend his dream and his family. Not everybody thought he was real. His actions were perceived by Janice's parents as bringing their daughter down. According to Kenny's 2012 memoir, they were certain that he had destroyed her life. While Kenny sketched guitar notes, her mother handed him the employment ads that she had circled during breakfast. A framed picture of Kenny's band was the only present they gave the newlyweds that Christmas in 1958. Her parents, however, refused to even display it on the wall. They advised him to let Janice to return home if he was unable to guarantee a consistent salary within a year. Every family meal felt like an interview that Kenny couldn't pass, despite his best efforts to grin. Both he and the marriage were worn down by it. By October of 1959, everything fell apart. 6 months was the age of their daughter. Kenny went outside to cool off one evening during an argument. Janice and her mother were gone when he returned. Every toy and blanket was packed and taken. Their divorce was filed, and it was over by April 1960. Their marriage ended 686 days after they were married. At that point, Kenny was already on tour with the Bobby Doyle Trio, performing 6 nights a week, making $55 per show, and mostly using that money to pay for motel rooms. He claimed on Fox News years later that music became my mistress. The mistress prevailed. Janice was married again in 1961. Her new spouse lived in a secure Dallas home and had a steady job. Kenny didn't. He continued to live on the road and chase stages. Thus, he had to make a tough decision. In writing, he consented to limit his visits to his daughter to 2 hours each week. However, he would be her father. I would be her father, he stated. He made an effort, but by the end of the year, he had already missed 42 of the 52 trips due to his schedule. He took a full step back. He felt that was the only right thing to do, even though it shattered his heart. Kenny Rogers was selling out arenas all over the world by 1980. The Gambler and Lady was sung together with. However, one note remained with him forever. It had been 15 years since he last saw his daughter. He attempted to mend it. In the hopes of seeing her again, he took her and Janice to Hawaii. However, the week concluded with awkward looks and silence. It was unsuccessful. He told the truth aloud in 2012. I put my career before having my first child, and I am unable to pay back that loan. 3 years later, during his last tour, he halted mid-song in front of 12,000 fans in Atlanta. Success had taken things that money couldn't buy, he added. For example, he taught his daughter how to ride a bike. And when he sang about gamblers and chances, everyone knew exactly what he meant. But Kenny Rogers didn't become famous as the well-known bearded gambler. On May 3, 1966, at the age of 27, he arrived for a rehearsal in Los Angeles, with a stand-up bass and a string of small-time jazz jobs. On that day, he became a member of the New Christy Minstrels, a popular folk group consisting of 30 members. They had already sold more than 5 million records and won a Grammy. Kenny was making $50 a night performing in bars in Houston, but suddenly he was entering a world of national television shows that drew 20 million viewers. Rules came along with the spotlight. He was required to wear a green jacket with the group's name sewn on it and shave his beard. It was simple but effective. Their 1966 Christmas album reached number 73 on the Billboard 200, their strongest debut in 2 years, and their record sales increased by 12%. By March 1967, less than a year later, Kenny and 4 other minstrels had had enough. They had had enough of being instructed what to sing and never getting paid. They rented a cheap studio in Hollywood for $28 per night and quit together on April 10. The first edition was their name. Kenny's expression changed. He pierced his ear, grew his hair, and invested all of his savings, roughly $8,000, in new equipment. Reprise Records signed them in 6 weeks. In terms of money, it wasn't a huge deal. All they received was $15,000. But the freedom was what counted. They recorded 8 songs in 36 hours, which was more than he had been permitted to accomplish with the Minstrels in a full year. They recorded the chaotic, hazy song, Just Dropped In, on October 10, 1967. The intro was played quietly by Glenn Campbell. It exploded when it struck the radio in January 1968. It peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 by February 17. Although it sounded like a hallucinogenic dream, the lyrics were actually a warning about LSD. In just 4 months, the song sold around 2 million copies. It was played on jukeboxes by soldiers in Vietnam, and the band even secured a slot on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, thanks to it. The word psychedelic was suppressed by the censors, but it made no difference. Kenny was here. Promoters were already using Kenny's name alone to advertise events by May 1969. It was leaned into by the record label. The first edition of their 4th album, featuring Kenny Rogers, was released. That small adjustment had a big impact. Kenny's earnings from live performances increased to $2,500, and his songwriting portion doubled to 50%. Although it also suggested that he would go solo in the future, it resolved some backstage disputes regarding who should receive the limelight. It's ironic that Kenny didn't even sing the first single under the new moniker. Guitarist Terry Williams sang on Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town. Nevertheless, it sold 2 million copies and peaked at number 6. Regardless of the singer, the rebranding was successful. The original edition got their own show in a Toronto studio in 1971, building a mock Mississippi riverboat set, rather than chasing talk show appearances like other bands. Rolling on the River was the name of the show, which debuted on September 18, 1971. More stations carried it than The Ed Sullivan Show ever did. 163. Kenny played with visitors like B.B. King, Chich, and Chong under the steam stacks every Saturday night. The show averaged 7.2 million viewers in its first season, and in some places, it even outperformed The Partridge Family. Even though the program had to be cut down to 30 minutes by 1972, it still had 48 acts and made extensive use of dry ice. The program concluded in 1973. Kenny had already considered going solo, but he had taken a unique step. Before turning 35, he had a TV variety show and a psychedelic rock success. On a more personal note, Kenny's second marriage ended quickly. He married Jean at a Houston church on October 3, 1960. Even though they had left before midday, something didn't feel right by that evening. According to Kenny, they both recognized the error within 48 hours. Nevertheless, they remained together because managers believed that his marriage made him more marketable, and he became immediately renowned. The performance must continue. Silently, it came to an end on April 24, 1963. They didn't quarrel over homes or money. They only got into a fight over a 13-inch black and white TV. Jean understood. By the summer of that year, Kenny was developing bass parts for songs like Just Dropped In while residing in a budget motel in Los Angeles. Everything that followed was shaped by that brief divorce. He got married for the third time just 6 months after the papers were signed. He married Margot Anderson, a 23-year-old Texas socialite, on October 15, 1963. Their son, Kenneth Ray Rogers, Jr., was born on May 24, 1964, while she was already pregnant. Kenny wasn't there much. He spent 280 nights traveling in 1964 alone, the same year that Reuben James rose to the top of the charts. In a 1978 interview, years later, Kenny claimed that during the first 6 months, he only saw his baby boy 9 times. Rather than giving embraces, he sent Polaroids. Margot was not content. To make a point, she emailed his tour accountant all of the diaper receipts, keeping them. She spent more than $400 in a single month. Those receipts were retained by Kenny, who made reference to them in his memoirs. The evidence of a family was so overwhelming. By 1975, Kenny was going solo after the first edition disbanded. That year, he played 210 gigs, and his song Lucille was beginning to gain popularity. In April, Margot filed for divorce. She testified in court that she was under a great deal of emotional strain due to his frequent absence. Kenny had only spent 16 nights at home throughout the first 4 months of that year. According to official data, for every 88 nights he was on stage, it was 1 night at home. The separation was finalized on July 15, 1975. Margot received $60,000 in cash, a Buick, and the house. That may not seem like much now, but it was a lot in those days. Marianne Gordon followed, wearing her actor smile and exuding a calm charm that would surprise even Kenny Rogers. She met him on the set of Hi Ha. She was his 4th wife, having been married since October 1, 1977. 5 months before The Gambler would soar to the top and make Rogers a legend, the timing was almost unbelievable. Despite the fact that both spouses were superstars for the first time, their lives soon diverged. While he was out performing over 100 performances annually and constructing a half-acre dream mansion in Georgia with a private golf course, she was filming Look, What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby. Kenny released a 3-minute song titled The Gambler on November 15, 1978. What transpired next was unbelievable, but he believed it may perform well on country radio. It debuted in the top 20 on the Billboard Hot 100, peaked at number 1 on the country chart, and peaked at number 3 on the adult contemporary list. In 1980, the song won Best Male Country Vocal Performance and brought Kenny all the way to the 2020 annual Grammy Awards. The wisdom of the song is condensed into 271 words, and no was the word that was used the most out of all of those. However, more than simply the single was successful. It impacted even harder when the Gambler album was released a week before Thanksgiving 1978. It soared to the top of the country albums list and reached number 12 on the Billboard 200 chart. Not many country records had jumped that far. It sold more than 4 million copies in the United States alone by 1983. Then an unforeseen event occurred. The Gambler, a made-for-TV film, was shown by CBS on April 8, 1980. Although nobody knew what to anticipate, the film became a big success. It was nominated for an Emmy, won an Eddie Award for editing, and persuaded CBS to continue. In 1983, 1987, 1991, and 1994, the follow-ups were released. That brief 3-nut song became a 9-hour Western drama, as each one continued where the previous one left off. It developed into a full-fledged TV franchise by 1994, and it was successful. Rogers and Bruce Boxleitner starred in one of the sequels, which even went on to become the season's highest-rated Western. Then Dolly arrived. The Bee Gees' song, Islands in the Stream, was released by Kenny and Dolly on August 19, 1983. It overtook Total Eclipse of the Heart as the #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 7 weeks later. They were the first country pair to occupy all 3 positions, since Glen Campbell in 1968 when it simultaneously topped the adult contemporary and country charts. In its first week, the single received over 4,000 radio spins, and by Christmas, it had sold 2 million copies. The RAIAA revised its figures in 2023. With more than 3 million certified copies sold, Islands in the Stream is currently triple platinum. Despite their widespread reputation, Kenny and Dolly only had 5 duets officially recorded in their 30 years together. Only 5. You Can't Make Old Friends was released in 2013, after Islands in the Stream. Love is Strange, Real Love, and Christmas Without You. Their farewell would be that final one. However, their impact more than made up for their lack of quantity. Of the 5, 3 reached the top of the national chart. One of them became viral. In 2014, another received a Grammy nomination. Kenny likes to claim that they outperformed baseball great Ted Williams in terms of stats. He was not mistaken. Although it was never the case, fans always longed to see romance between them. Although they behaved more like siblings behind the scenes, Dolly once referred to Kenny as the only man she had ever seen who made white hair appealing. In 2014, she said, "He was like a big brother to me." So did Kenny. They purposefully kept their flirtation platonic for decades. On the tour, there were even jokes. Venue managers wagered on which city's audience would witness their kiss at last. It didn't occur. The magic was infused with such constraint. Then came the music that made all the difference. You cannot re-establish old friendships. They got back together in Nashville to record it on July 20, 2013. Rogers was 74. The studio went silent when they sang the words, "What will I do when you are gone?" Before the first verse had even finished, the sound engineer recalled individuals wiping away their tears. In order to gather himself, Rogers himself had to pause filming multiple times. It didn't matter that the song only peaked at number 57 on the charts. Within 10 days, 1 million people viewed the music video. It was surprising for a couple whose typical fan was already in their 50s. Sometimes the truth is more important than chart numbers. Her 6th marriage followed. It all began in a little Atlanta Italian restaurant in 1992. Despite being on a blind date, Kenny Rogers couldn't take his eyes off the waitress across the room, who was 26 years old. Wanda Miller was her name. He was meant to be with a woman, but he ignored her. He merely observed Wanda. He gave her his phone number at the end of the night, but she tossed it away. But there was something about him that intrigued her. After a while, she called back. 5 years of getting to know one another began with that one phone conversation. Since they were actually 2 years younger than Kenny, Wanda's parents were difficult to persuade, but he gradually gained their trust. Kenny and Wanda were married on June 1997, at his enormous 1,000-acre estate in Athens. At the age of 59, he made a vow: not another 200 shows annually. To create place for anything new in his life, he reduced his performance schedule, performing fewer than 50 times a year. In 2004, that something arrived. Kenny Rogers became a father once more on July 6, when he was 65 years old. The twin boys were born to Wanda, who was 34 years his junior. Jordan Edward weighed 5 pounds 8 ounces, while Justin Charles weighed 6 pounds 10 ounces. For Kenny, everything changed in an instant when it happened in Atlanta. Having twins at his age made him reevaluate everything, even though he already had 3 grown children. He gave up going on tours. Saturdays were no longer used for interviews or arenas. Now it was Super Saturday. Hours at Chuck E., ridiculous car wash races, and McDonald's breakfast, cheese, and endless games in the backyard. For them, he even constructed an actual miniature train. He wanted the boys to understand that his family was his top priority. His friends made fun of him by claiming that the gambler had exchanged cards for peekaboo. But when Kenny mentioned that time was passing quickly, he wasn't kidding. He aimed to condense 10 years' worth of memories. Additionally, the twins continued to perpetuate Super Saturday in his memory by 2025, when he was 21. They were over 6 feet tall, had their father's beard, and continued to respect the upbringing he had given them. The world began to worry in May 2019. Due to what his team described as extreme dehydration, Kenny was sent to a hospital in Georgia. The media went crazy even though he was 80. There were rumors that he was near death, that hospice care had already been arranged, and that he had contacted Dolly Parton to bid her farewell. Although they acknowledged that Kenny would need some time to recuperate in the hospital, his spokeswoman referred to it all as wild falsehoods. The extent of the anguish he had been concealing was unknown at the time. His knees were twisted by arthritis. Even after years of back surgery, he continued to have issues. For decades, he had struggled with his cholesterol. He had surgery in 2014 to treat a serious intestinal ailment. Doctors now feared it had returned. For 2 weeks, they closely monitored him. Fans gathered outside the hospital, holding placards that said, "Kenny, stay put." He even posted a video of himself grinning and stating, "Dehydrated? Yes. Holding my cards? Not today." However, those who knew him well acknowledged in private that this was the worst health scare he has experienced since his 2011 heart surgery. He had startled fans by canceling the final 8 gigs of his farewell tour in April 2018. Just a year earlier, he had taken it all around the world, and it had been dubbed the gambler's last deal. 200 performances on 5 continents. However, his body was not keeping up at the age of 79. Doctors advised him to halt when he experienced a dizzy episode on stage. He paid attention. He didn't want to have to apologize and leave. Overnight, shows were canceled in countries including London and North Carolina. His name had to be removed from Stagecoach Festival's posters. He had intended to sing a final song with Dolly Parton, but it didn't happen. For the first time in 60 years, he failed to complete a tour. His final performance total was 53. Since 1957, he had recorded each one in a leather notepad. The world then heard a song they had never heard before, a week after his passing. Goodbye was the name of it. Lionel Richie had written it years before, and it was subtly recorded in 2009. It sat there waiting till March 27, 2020, but it was never published. A basic guitar. Kenny's voice sounded a bit shakier and weaker. His first words sounded like a farewell letter. No more kisses. No more I love yous. Lionel subsequently revealed that he had composed the song in 1981 while watching Kenny pray backstage, and he always believed the song would find its moment. The chorus muttered, "There's peace in where you are. Maybe all I need to know." Goodbye was played 2.3 million times on Spotify in just 2 days, more than any other Kenny song in a single week. Critics said it was his version of My Way, the perfect goodbye, without realizing it would be. Kenny Rogers died at 10:25 p.m. on March 20, 2020, at home in Sandy Springs, Georgia, at the age of 81. Wanda was present. The twins and his 3 elder children were also affected. According to a nurse, he said his final words to his grandson Kyle over a FaceTime conversation were, "Be kind. Stay together." A large public funeral was not possible due to CO-19, but in his honor, establishments nationwide turned off their lights, including the Grand Ole Opry. A small private service was held on March 25th, and his ashes were placed in a cedar urn that he had carved himself, with a joker on one side and a stack of poker chips on the other. The Astrodome in Houston also played the lyrics of Lady across its neon sky, and Wanda stated that he didn't want a grave. The Gambler was finally done playing, but his music and those Super Saturdays never stopped. In 2013, when Kenny was 75, he finally received the call he had waited decades for. In the end, he had sold 120 million records, won 3 Grammys, and left behind 5 children, the youngest of whom was 16, and the oldest was 66. All he wanted was for Islands in the Stream to be played loud enough for heaven to hear. He already had a diamond album, 3 Grammys, and had been honored at the Kennedy Center. Why did the Country Music Hall of Fame wait until year 55 of his career? Kenny joked that it gave him time to bring his twin boys, who were 8 at the time. Gar Brooks and Barry Gibbs stood next to him, as he was inducted on October 27th in Nashville. Everyone thought it had taken too long. When they touched the bronze plaque bearing his name, he became emotional. That night was also historic, because thanks to his Las Vegas Gambler show, Kenny became the only artist ever inducted into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Gaming Hall of Fame. Few people in the hall had ever achieved #1 on the pop charts, but Kenny had done it twice. Once with Lady and once with Islands in the Stream. He had transcended the country so much that they could no longer ignore him. Over the course of 46 years, Kenny became a father 5 times, each child leading a very different kind of life. In 1958, his first daughter, Carol Lynn, was born, and after relinquishing custody as a teenager, she was raised without a name. She was raised as a psychology teacher in Georgia and has only ever been interviewed once. In 1964, Kenny Rogers Jr. tried his hand at acting, making appearances on shows like MacGyver, before launching a faith-based film production company. Christopher was born in 1981, and desiring nothing to do with show business, he fixes vintage Airstream trailers in Tennessee. Then came the twins in 2004. Both boys wore purple gowns at their high school graduation in 2023. Jordan aspired to be a marine biologist. stating that he wanted to protect the oceans his dad had once sailed on tours. Kenny had once said he would never put his kids in the spotlight, and he meant it. Justin wanted to study audio engineering. Each of them followed a different path.